I'm Chris Thomas, and today we're going to be painting this simple little lime. Now, I know a single piece of fruit may not be the most ambitious or thought-provoking subject to paint, but actually fruit has been a source of inspiration for artists for hundreds of years. Artists such as Caravaggio, Monet, even Van Gogh used fruit as their models. The subject matter is great for studying light, value, color, and form. And besides that, it just makes a beautiful little painting. Enough about the history lesson. Let's just get started. Now, as those of you follow along with me, I'm going to show you a little bit about what I'm using here today. I'm working from a 12 by 16 palette, and I want to go through some of the colors and what they are. It's a very limited palette, so I'm going to start over here at the right. I have a little bit of liquid. That's going to be my medium to thin the paint down when I need to in the beginning. I have 3 piles of white. Now the reason I have 3 piles instead of just one large one is that at some point we're going to be mixing a real vivid green, vivid light yellow, and I will be pulling specifically from that pile of paint for that. In other places we'll be using different colors that aren't so vivid. And to avoid polluting this pile of paint, I will pull the white from that section as well. And it just gives me white piles of paint that are clean and always available to use. Up here in the right corner, I have cadmium yellow lemon, I have cadmium red, I have French ultramarine, also just called ultramarine depending on the manufacturer, and I have viridian green and burnt sienna. Now the brands I'm using are Winsor Newton. You can use whatever brand that you like to use, but these are the colors we'll be working with today. For the canvas, I just have a regular canvas here. It's not anything special, it's just not an expensive canvas. I did put an additional coat of gesso on it, so if you have gesso and have time to put another coat on, I think it helps seals it up and gives it a better, smoother coat. And so I do have an 8 by 10 canvas here. Now, as we look at the canvas, oftentimes I would like to start with a toned canvas. And it's very common for artists to start with some sort of middle gray or a light sort of tan, buff color. You want something that's kind of warm and neutral. As you can see here, I just have a white canvas. So one of my early goals is to just get a tone on the canvas. And so the way I'm going to be doing that is I'm going to be picking up some of this burnt sienna, which is a real reddish brown, and it's a little bit of liquid right here as well to thin this down, because we're going to need to thin this to help it push onto the canvas and not be so thick. I would think that this is too red for what I want as an undercoat, so I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine blue. So I'm going to have ultramarine blue up at this end, and I'll work down toward this until I find the right ratio I want. Now, if you're pretty familiar with some other paints, we're basically making something that's along the lines of a burnt umber. But doing this combination gives me the opportunity to move from a reddish tone to a darker, cooler, more blue tone. And it gives me that variety within the painting. I'm going to add a little bit more liquid to my paint. And I just want to thin it, push it on thinly, because I don't want a lot of paint on here. I just want to get this toned. I want to get rid of the white. Everything looks really dark on the white. And if I just get this pushed back to something a little bit more neutral, it helps me to look at the values and establish everything. Now, I've used the liquid just to help get this to push around and spread it and get it into the tooth of the canvas, so I don't have these little white dots showing through, which is, I just want to get that like that. But one thing I'm going to show you what not to do don't get a lot of liquid and make this really slippery, slimy. If you get too much, that's okay. Just come in, take a paper towel, just kind of soak up a little bit of that extra. Okay? Pretty much after this point, I'll use some of this thin paint to draw with and get placement of my objects, but I probably won't be adding much more liquid to my paint after this. I'll probably be painting with more paint as it comes from the tube. Now, one of the goals I have when I approach a painting is composing on the canvas. I want to see where this lime is going to fit on here, how big it's going to be, and what area of the canvas it's going to rest on. So I'm not going to start with a detailed line drawing. I might just start with a little bit of paint and just say I'm looking at this roundish part of the lime and say, well, I think it needs to be up in this area. It feels like it's about this large. And then I'm looking at the rind that is peeled, and I'm looking at the angle of it. Seems like it is something about like this angle here. So I just look at that, and it doesn't have to be exact at this point. Now what I'm doing when I hold up my brush here is I'm looking at the angle of the bottom of this rind and how it intersects with the line right here, and that tells me this is the end of it. So I'm just sort of laying this out at this point. I would imagine if we could see through, the lime is doing something like this. Seems to be enough space here. Now, this line I'm drawing now is right here. Here's the part of the line I cut off. And here is the tip of the line. Spending a little time drawing, I'm going to look for the bottom of where I think the line should be, and I'm thinking it's somewhere right in here. I got a little bit more concentrated color with less liquid in it. Start pulling off to the side a little bit more of the mixture I'm using, but I'm getting out of the liquid mixture, so it's a little bit thicker, makes a little bit darker line. And then I'm still thinking about where this is going. And you see, I'm basically drawing with my brush. Now, as I hold this up at this angle, I'm looking at an angle of the flesh of the fruit right here and where it lines up with this the rind that's right here. Now if I think about it, this rind, the tip of this, cuts right through the middle. So that's where that rind starts, and it seems to be at an angle like this, and we're doing something like this. So you see, I'm not trying to get all the little undulations that are happening. I'm just looking for what it is in general. And I think that's the way you should start out a painting. You start out looking for the very general placement of things, and you start refining it down, and you just keep working from general to more specific. Common mistake that I see students make are they try to get too specific and too detailed too quickly. And so right now we're just looking at where is this sitting on the canvas, and is it the right size and proportion for the size of the canvas. And because it would be very easy to draw this too big or draw it too small. Sometimes I will see somebody draw the lime and they start it down here and they get all this empty space. We want it to sit on here and feel like it fills up the canvas but doesn't overfill it. So here is another angle. I may draw, I'm drawing the white of the rind here, but it should be white. I'm just putting a little bit of marks in to help me see. There, the lime is round, but look for straight segments. That will help you, even though it's a round object, roundish. If you can look for it and break it down into straight little segments, it will give your subject a more sculptural feel. Sometimes you can even do some measuring. Like if I was looking at the real lime, I might measure the height of this to the width, and I'm going to do that right now and just see if I've got the right ratio. And what I find is that the height is the same as the width. So I'll just check that right now. Pretty close. So that's good. So I'm still going in and refining this just a little bit more. Here's the rind, connects here. There is, as the flesh of the rind goes up in this section, there's a little darker section. I'm not going to put a lot of paint because I can see that it needs to be a little bit greenish, and I don't want to fight that paint at this moment. So at this point, I'm feeling pretty good about the rough scale. I may even start to put a little variation in this. I'm just kind of reevaluating. I'm looking at this edge right here and how it relates up to the lime, and it seems like it should cut right down through the middle of it and hit right there. So I feel like I'm on track at that point. So I'm just breaking this down, looking for linear segments. Just kind of feeling approximate lengths. This is pretty good. It's working out. So at this point, take as much time as you need to go over what you've already put down and just double check it. Oftentimes I'll triple check it, and you'll keep refining that drawing and making it a little more exact and in proportion, and you'll start to see subtleties. The more you get on there, the more little pieces of information you have to relate to one another, and that just helps you build the drawing. So take your time, don't worry about that. So I'm going back in, I'm just kind of going over this again. I'm getting pretty close to where I want to start to develop some of the big values that I see, and that will help me move along. I would call this pretty much a monochromatic block in or drawing, just to get us established. As I'm looking at the drawing, I think maybe there's a little too much space here. The rind should come over a little bit more. That gives me a little more flesh here to see that's open. It may not be as obvious, but there is a flat piece here where I started to cut the line, and it's a conical shape, kind of like a cone that's been cut off flat. And so I may just get a sense of how that is. That's pretty good. Now at this point, some of this area here is going to be really light and colorful, and the brown that I've put on here is a little bit dark for what I want. I just picked up a little touch of liquid, folded up my paper towel, and I'm going to come in and just wipe that out because I don't want to fight that color, and I want to get that back to a lighter value. I could say the same here, but that's not really too dark, and that's not going to be a big fight right there with trying to cover that over. My next stage is I want to start to develop and put in some of these darks back here. Now if you're looking at the image, you may see that it's dark everywhere, but I'm not going to worry about getting that totally covered everywhere, because you're going to want to, I mean, you can always cover it later, But I think it's important that we look for a little bit of a way to put the paint on that is interesting and has a little bit of a spontaneous feel. We can always come in and cover it and make it a little more solid later. But I may want some of these initial marks that I'm putting in to stay in the final piece, just to give it a little bit of energy. So grabbing a little bit more burnt sienna, I want to push this a little redder, a little more red in this section. If I want it to be dark, like it is back in here, and more towards a blackish color, a really dark color, I will add more ultramarine. So that's why I like having this mixture of burnt sienna to ultramarine. I get all the variety. Before I get too far along though, I probably want to just get a sense of where the edge of the table is. If you notice, I'm going to draw through, even though the table edge is behind here, I'm drawing through so I can make a continuous straight line. Don't worry if it's perfect or not. The height, the thickness of this comes all the way down to here. I may change that a little bit and make it a little less thick, just from a stylistic point of view. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit more blue and put this on a little thinner here. That may look like this is dark, but by the time I come in and push some darker notes underneath this table edge, then it stands out again and looks light again. I've pretty much, at this point, used up all the paint that had liquid in it, and so I'm not likely to grab any more liquid because there's still a slipperiness on the canvas from when I first put that initial wash in as I toned that canvas. And so this paint now is mixing with that and thinning down, and again, I don't want this paint to be too thin because it'll stay really slick and sort of slimy, and it'll be hard to get other paint to stick to it. I know I want it to be nice and dark in this section because the value of this green in the lime in this section right here is not really super bright, and so I want to push this value down because I want to make sure that that lime really stands out as being lit up against this dark background. And so pushing that down much darker. And I may have a little bit more liquid on here than I would like, medium. If you're not using liquid, you may be using something different. So as I look at this, I see that this is really nice and dark under here, and there's a shadow that's coming over and being cast by this line. It goes back a bit. just going to put a little bit of that in. It hits the table right here, and then this piece right here is casting a shadow against this ledge of the table. So I'll just pull down into that. You know, I actually may pull this down a little lower than what I was thinking, but we can do that in a little bit later. That's okay that this paint is still here. It'll give me an opportunity to work that paint into this dark and make a nice transition anyway. So it doesn't have to be perfect at that point. I just want to make sure I've got the drawing on here. I'm going to put a little bit of shadow on here. I've got the proportions, and I got it setting on the canvas where I want it. Now, let me smooth some of this out just a little bit. Okay. This is going to develop as we move through the painting, but this is what I'm looking for as I get started. Getting basically a value study going. I don't always start a painting this way, but this is a very good traditional way to start, and it will help separate making a painting into more manageable portions. And so you know what you're looking for in this section. We're looking to establish a drawing, where it is on the canvas, and starting to set up value relationships. For instance, if I look at this section here compared to the rind is actually a little darker than the edge of the table edge. So, and even this can go a little bit darker. This is darker than this, but this is still darker than this section. So I'm going to just smear just a little thin coat of paint on there. And that's going to mix with my other layers of colors and influence them as well. So our goals at this point were to establish where the item sits on the canvas, how big it is, and to start to refine the drawing. Actually refine the drawing fairly well. Doesn't have to be perfect. Don't worry about it being perfect, because your painting's going to refine as we go. Spend as much time as you need doing this. Because these are some of the foundations, and if you get the foundations in the wrong place and off, it's going to make the subsequent layers a little more difficult. So stay tuned and join me next segment.